This video is best viewed on a stereoscopic 3D monitor or with YouTube's cardboard viewing option. For more 3D options, use the Flash Player by clicking the first link in the description. Welcome to Stereo 3D Productions and this Bioshock VorpX setup guide. This entry on our list was an obvious must, and while the setup is rather easy, there are a few tricks to get the best out of it, and we're going to make sure everyone gets to play it just right. Today's video is part of a series of VorpX tutorials that begins with the VorpX Universal Guide, a video I highly recommend watching if you haven't seen it yet. There will be a link to that guide at the top of the description of this video. Another important note is the videos in this series are open to updates. If you see the tag outdated between brackets in the title of this guide, look for a link to an updated version of this video in the description below. Bioshock's appearance on Stereo 3D Productions was brief. Very brief. Back in January 2016, I attempted to start a series on this game. From the beginning, things went well. I was given a nerve-wracking welcome, realizing this game had a lot more focus on classic horror than its second successor, Bioshock Infinite, which I had actually played first. For an old game, it was translating pretty well to VR in terms of visuals and atmosphere. However, the pre-DirectVR problems eventually came into play. See, this game, like its successor, has a very zealous built-in mouse interpolation, also known as mouse smoothing. This makes for very unreliable manual VR head tracking that will almost always overshoot gestures when done quickly, giving for extremely disorientating gunplay. Even my pitch-locked mouse didn't help in this game. It actually made things worse because the game's vertical axis drifted erratically on its own. Enter DirectVR. Since VorpX DirectVR is capable of fully overtaking the game's camera rotation, I finally had time to revisit this title and see if the feature in fact improves head tracking to a point where the game can be enjoyable. The short answer is, oh yes. The long answer? Well, it's time to get to the tutorial. It's a quick one, the setup is easy, but there's a couple of important steps, so let's do this. The game preparation is the bulk of our configuration. For Bioshock, we won't even be using any VorpX settings optimizer. Normally, assuming you've just installed the game for this, I'd tell you to go ahead and run the game once normally in 2D without VorpX running. However, this time, before we do that, make sure to add the -DX9 launch parameter, either on Steam through the game's properties as shown here, or use a shortcut if you're playing a local version of the game, which we now see here. Now, with the parameter added, go ahead and launch the game in plain old 2D. This allows the game to get its first time stuff done, and we can take the opportunity to go in the game's options and change a few things we'll need on the way. Head into the game's graphics options. First, for resolution, you can use the following depending on the strength of your GPU. The lower res you can run at is 1280 by 1024. This should do nicely on a GTX 970 equivalent or less. For a mid-end system on a GTX 980 equivalent, 1400 by 1050 will run well. And finally, for high-end systems on a GTX 1070 equivalent or greater, run using 1600 by 1024. Next, make sure you set windowed mode to on. Turn vertical sync to off. Most of the other settings can be adjusted to suit your needs or tweak game performance. I've found some minor stereoscopic issues with shadow cutouts here and there, but it's not been prominent and the game's effects all work very well. Notice that DirectX 10 detail surfaces isn't available here. This is a sign we launched the game correctly in DirectX 9, which makes stereoscopic 3D function properly. Do make sure that the last option, horizontal FOV lock, remains checked on, as DirectVR will depend on it. Apply this configuration, then head into the control options. You'll want to reduce this game's mouse sensitivity by at least 1 notch in order to get smooth play. Its odd built-in mouse interpolation makes the game's sensitivity setting like it's at the max, even on middle. I've got mine on 2 for now. Go ahead and apply those changes. The mouse sensitivity can be tinkered with during gameplay, so you can go back there later anyways. We're done with our short 2D session, no need to actually play yet, let's exit. You can take the resolution a step higher if you want. If you're on a GTX 1080 equivalent or greater, we'll look at how to run the game at 1920 by 1440. Locate the file bioshock.ini in the path displayed on the screen right now. Open that file in Notepad and locate the windowed viewport keys, which dictate windowed resolution. Set the X value to 1920 and the Y value to 1440, then save and close the file. For all users running on all resolutions, it is possible that settings may revert. I've seen it happen twice during my testing. This is annoying and we can easily prevent it. Navigate to the bioshock.ini file in the displayed path, then right-click on it and go Properties. From the Properties window, check the Read Only box and hit Apply, then OK. This will prevent the game from dumping all the VR-friendly settings we've been working on. Keep in mind that this change will render the game unable to save future settings change. So if you want to modify options from here on, make sure to go back there and uncheck the read-only box before doing that. It's time to fire up your VR runtimes, either Oculus Home or SteamVR, it doesn't matter. Fire up VorpX and finally fire up the game. Assuming you're starting from the very beginning, let the initial cutscene play, and with the terrible field of view and default head tracking, would you kindly stagger your way to the lighthouse? It's not optimal, but you don't want to run your DirectVR scan from in the water next to the burning airplane. It might mess things up completely. Make it to firm ground. Now, I've found myself a peaceful spot for my game, so it's time to hit the delete key to bring up the VorpX HUD. First, under Main Settings, make sure 3D Reconstruction is on Geometry 3D. The Z-depth options barely seem to be working here anyways, and the geometry performs really well and looks best. If geometry isn't here or isn't working, it's possible that you didn't launch the game in DirectX 9. Make sure you didn't miss the very first step covered in the game preparation section. Use the timecodes in the description if you need to go back. Set 3D separation strength to 1.0. Surprisingly, the default 3D separation setting works really well with this game. No need to change a thing. Go ahead and run your DirectVR scan now using the button in the main settings section. VorpX will scan your field of view, rotation, and position. Position seems to sometimes want to take a little longer. Sit still and wait for it to complete. I have yet to see any aspects of these scans actually fail, so you should be good too. Now, you've got yourself a beautiful view of whatever section of the game you're in, but we're not quite done yet. Head into Image Settings. First, if you're running at 1600 by 1024 or greater, set Crystal Image to off. Leave it on normal if you're running on the medium or lower resolutions. You can leave G3D Shadow Treatment on auto, but I do recommend using Turn Off. You won't be missing out much and it'll prevent some stereoscopic issues you can encounter. Let's take a look at an option we can use to increase pixel density. The highest resolution I offer looks great, but the lower ones might need a bit of help. Since VorpX adjusts the field of view in relation to the image zoom setting properly with DirectVR, you can lower this value a bit to squeeze in the game's render. The downside of this is you'll be cropping your field of view, and below 0.85 the bars become a little bit obvious. The upside of using this trick is you'll reduce the shimmer and aliasing by a good deal. For 1600 by 1024 and below, I found myself accepting as low as 0.85. On 1920 by 1440 though, I just went down to 0.95 to get an ever so slight boost on density, and that's it. Play with this option as you may, it's a great workaround for those unable to run it at its very high-end setting. Next, go in DirectVR settings. We have an interesting option here called Player FOV. You'll notice that the hand models, while in proper stereoscopic 3D and at the correct depth, appear very large. A good way to reduce the impression of massive hands is to raise the Player FOV value. You can jam it all the way to the max, but the problem there is the model's shoulder becomes very distracting and oddly placed, and quite in view. I found a sweet spot around 10 to be an excellent setting. The hand model might still be a bit big, but nothing distracting comes into view. Next, head to Display Settings and turn Direct Mode Fluid Sync off. This option actually doesn't seem to be working correctly here, so even if it could help, it looks like something's actually wrong with it here. You may even notice in this segment of the video showing the VorpX HUD so far that there was some judder. Now that I've turned Fluid Sync off, you might actually spot the difference. It's suddenly very smooth. Last but not least, pay mouse and gamepad settings a visit to turn Disable Mouse Acceleration to on. Do keep in mind that in my test sessions, I did need to rerun my DirectVR scan each time I launched the game and started playing, so you probably will have to do it as well. That's it! You're now ready to play Bioshock in full VR glory. There are some issues you'll encounter, but from my tests I've not really run into anything critical other than the odd game crash upon loading a save mid-play. I'll cover this and other known issues in the next segment. So you're out there having a blast, right? And the game's fun and wow, what a cutscene. Wait, my field of view reverted. Wait, hey, my head tracking's wrong. Damn it. Yeah, this game likes to forget your DirectVR scan after certain events. It's not abusively frequent for the player, but it will happen here and then. Fortunately, you should be in a spot without adversity leaving you time to just rescan immediately. Open your VorpX HUD and just rescan using the button under main settings if that happens. Do be careful not to run your scan during the cutscene that caused this. Wait for the game to give you back normal control. Next, there's the crashing. It has to be brought up because while it's kind of random, the ways to trigger it are the same. The game does not like a save file loaded mid-play. Now, going to the Vita chamber works fine, but loading a save has caused my game to crash at least twice in testing. Speaking of the crashing, such an event can actually cause the game to completely revert its configuration to defaults. Fortunately, I did offer up a trick to avoid this in the game preparation section of this video. Use the timecodes in the description to go back there if you need to. This next one is more minor, but it bothers me. While most of the mouse interpolation issues are gone thanks to DirectVR, I can still see a sort of fight going on here between this god-awful mouse interpolation and VorpX. For the most part, VorpX wins outright, but you'll notice that sometimes the aim can feel a bit shaky. This especially becomes obvious if you're relying too much on a synchronous time warp, aka dropping frames below 90. I bring it up because you too might notice it. This is a huge difference between this game and its second successor, Bioshock Infinite, While both games have seriously bad mouse interpolation built in, Bioshock Infinite is definitely responding a little better to DirectVR. It's not anywhere near the old manual VR disorientation days, but you'll miss an obvious shot here and there because of it in Bioshock. Next, we have a pretty dumb crouch head bob. Why on crouch? I don't freaking know. It's a stiff one too, it's really not comfortable. You'll probably want to be standing in the game as much as possible. I still haven't found a way to kill that off myself, but it's not like this game is Alien Isolation, the eternal crouching simulator now, is it? Oh, speaking of dumb things, the game uses a mouse wheel press to let you change your gun ammo type. This happens to be VorpX's edge peak hotkey, so you may want to change your control key setting for changing ammo types. As usual, most aim down sights will suck monkey ass for VR. You're just way better off using the normal crosshairs. You will get some pretty excellent aim with it, I've found. Firing from the hip is where it's at, and man, they did the shotgun really good in this game. I mean really good. This is a shotgun you want in VR. Good job planning for the future, Bioshock. Now, this next issue only affects those on the lower resolutions. That aliasing, oh boy. That's the exact same reason why I decided to force my way into 1920 by 1440. Oddly enough, that very high resolution looks almost identical in sharpness to running Bioshock Infinite at 1920 by 1080. I'm not sure why the difference is so large, but Bioshock shares aliasing issues eerily similar to Singularity. The good thing is we can force very high resolutions without completely destroying the game performance here, and the image zoom trick really helped a lot. Strange how the same engine can offer so many variations of issues from game to game. Now finally, and this is a bonus funny one, if you finalize your configuration right at the lighthouse in the beginning, the 3D will almost immediately expose a cheap trick the developers did for the moon and sky. You'll be treated to the sight of a billboard cutout picture of the sky 3 feet away from your face that rotates to face you in the correct angle to appear like it's a distant sky. It obviously doesn't affect gameplay at all. It's gone after you leave that area, and I'm only bringing it up because sometimes when you run a game in VR, you can see where the devs cheated. Some of you may wonder why I haven't revisited the case that is Bioshock any earlier. This is mostly because I'm fixated on Bioshock Infinite and a few other games at the moment. And my testing here proved that I'm probably doing the right thing. Yes, Bioshock appears to be a great game, but from what I've seen so far, Bioshock Infinite does everything better, except maybe for the classic horror. It's not just the mouse interpolation is better handled by DirectVR in the newer game, but the gunplay is downright better. The pacing makes more sense to me, and the enemy AI is completely different. Kind of more skittish in the 2007 original. Plus, while Bioshock visuals are quite the trip, they're definitely less colorful and more murky than its counterpart, not to mention the nearly 6-year age difference. I will, however, consider continuing the playthrough at some point. Bioshock feels very different from its second successor, and while the differences are taking some time for me to sort of accept, the game did grow on me progressively during this test, culminating to my falling in love with this absolutely amazing shotgun. I wanted to play up till the point where I had ended my old 2016 Let's Play episode performed on medium difficulty, so I loaded a new game on hard. Despite the difficulty increase, every single section went orders of magnitude better in terms of control, situational awareness, and most of all, head tracking and aim precision. Yes, the enemies are tough as fuck, but they're much less of a handful with precise controls. During the tests, I eventually stormed right past where I'd left off in 2016. Remember, I haven't played this game other than that sole Let's Play episode, so this was 100% uncharted territory, which isn't always the case for me in these. I finally got introduced to the shotgun. It sold me on the game right there and then. Take a look. Huh. Oh. Oh shit. Oh shit. What the fuck? I never got here. I never got to this part.
Vulgar little tramp! You're nothing! Go away! Dare you touch me! Clean it up! Clean it up!
I love this shotgun. This has to be... I am fucking shocked. Like I said, Bioshock may not be as perfect as its second successor, but it is indeed yet another game that runs nearly like a first-party virtual reality implementation. It can be a great starting point for a VorpX introduction, as it performs pretty well provided you don't overshoot settings too much, and it's likely that a lot of you might already have it in your libraries to begin with. Now it's time to get to the game's vScore. The vScore is a rating system created to evaluate how well a game can be run in VorpX. The score is on a scale of 100 points and is based on 9 criteria, 8 that yield points and 1 that is a penalty value. The criteria are, first, the fixed point values, where a game is given all or nothing for each. Acceptable 3D method. This is worth 30 points. If we can't have depth perception, we cannot have VR. Proper geometry 3D. Geometry 3D brings a game to life by providing the only authentic stereoscopic 3D method, so 15 points for that. In this case, Geometry 3D works for Bioshock provided you start the game in DirectX 9, all good here, 30 and 15. Proper head tracking. Head tracking that goes all over the place is no fun, so this is worth 15 points. Yes, I had my slight complaints about mouse interpolation, but I am knowingly being picky. The game does get the 15 points here. This head tracking is excellent. Second, the variable criteria, where the amount of points can be adjusted for each item. Sufficient field of view. A game really needs some means for forcing the field of view, and because of the various ways we can achieve this, some more effective and some less, this is worth up to 15 points. This is done by DirectVR in this case, so obviously we've got all the FOV points for Bioshock. Proper 3D hands and weapons. This has over time become a nice to have for third-party VR, as it's quite rare, but it does get a game up to 5 points for getting it right. I'm giving the game a 4 here. It's almost there. No disgusting cutout on the models like in Resident Evil 7, no separate depth layer like in Fallout 4. The only issue is their largeness, quote unquote, which we can kind of tweak to reduce a bit. I'm giving Bioshock a 4 here. Proper shadows and graphics. Good shadows are hard to come by in VR, especially the dynamic ones, and it's nice to see all our graphic effects working properly, so a game can gain up to 5 points on those. This was actually a bit hard to score. Yes, the dynamic shadow cutouts are wrong, but they're extremely few and far apart. I can't ignore the other things, like the water working spectacularly well, the particles being spot on, many light shafts and atmospheric effects showing just right, The game gets a 4 here. Proper user interface and heads-up display. Being able to see your health, ammo count, and such is a plus, isn't it? Up to 5 points for how a game handles a HUD. I'm surprised. I'm giving the game a 4 for some slight issues, and I mean slight. On lower resolutions, things won't always be fully readable, but for the most part, I've been able to easily work the menus, use the heads-up display for health and ammo, and even use the hack interface without any problems. The game gets an honorable 4 here. DirectVR bonus. DirectVR makes the process of setting up a game much easier and often delivers perfect head tracking. Based on how a game supports it, it can get up to 10 points in bonus. DirectVR is not just here in this case. It also saved this damn game's ability to go full VR, so it's definitely getting this entire bonus. The penalty criteria. The penalty criteria exists to offset a game's score due to glitches or major issues. Up to 10 points can be withdrawn. I'm taking off 3 points here. 1 for the DirectVR reset issue, the next point for the high risk of game crash when loading a save, which I did find annoying on occasion, and the last point shares 2 issues, that nasty god-awful crouch head bob that we can't turn off, and that slightly feisty aliasing. It's not a severe hit given our score is so high here, but it does just a notch in the total because they're issues we cannot ignore. Bioshock gets itself an amazing vScore of 94. Its second successor, Bioshock Infinite, only scored 1 point higher than this at 95, so you probably get the idea that this game here is a big deal for VorpX. The advantages brought on by DirectVR have simply transformed this title, and for once, it'll be interesting to have one of few entirely first-time runs through a game, so look for this amazing title to make a comeback on Stereo 3D Productions at some point this year. That's it for Bioshock, but before we wrap up, I want to update on the alien isolation situation. Not only did the VorpX tests I performed with the game yield poor results, too poor to recommend in any tutorial whatsoever, but we've actually all been saved. In the description, you'll find a link to a patch called Mother VR, which allows playing that game in the new headsets as if it were a first-party VR implementation. That's right. It'll likely never support motion controllers, but it's still one of my favorite games in VR personally, so I highly recommend that anyways. I did speak of Metro 2033 last video I produced, and that's still in the plans, but I moved to Bioshock before because I saw the game mentioned twice in my comments now, and the title was, after all, on my list, so it felt right to just get to Bioshock first. On that note, thanks for watching Stereo 3D Productions and this VorpX tutorial. Do feel free to suggest games in the comments. I have a list, but I'm open for more. I'll see you next time, folks.